بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذ قال إبراهيم رب اجعل هذا البلد آمنا واجنبني وبني أن نعبد الأصنام رب إنهن أضللن كثيرا من الناس فمن تبعني فإنه مني ومن عصاني فإنك غفور رحيم ربنا إني أسكنت من ذريتي بواد غير ذي زرع عند بيتك المحرم ربنا ليقيموا الصلاة فاجعل أفئدة من الناس تهوي إليهم وارزقهم من الثمرات لعلهم يشكرون ربنا إنك تعلم ما نخفي وما نعلن وما يخفى على الله من شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء الحمد لله الذي وهب لي على الكبر إسماعيل وإسحاق إن ربي لسميع الدعاء رب اجعلني مقيم الصلاة ومن ذريتي ربنا وتقبل دعاء ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب صدق الله العظيم.
Inshallah, jazakallah khairan, Hafiz Faraz, for that beautiful presentation, inshallah. So, I would like to get in directly to the program. Before we begin, I would just like to introduce to us what we'll be covering. We will be covering the ahkam of fasting, meaning the rules, the essentials, understanding that we need to have in terms of fasting. So there is one thing that we need to understand, that when it comes to learning the rules of Islam, learning the rules of Deen, the fuqaha, the scholars, they listed out all the details. So thus, there are some masail that can be very explicit. Some masail that if the parents do not want their children to know about here, they would like to educate them at home, then know that these masail are going to be discussed here so we can have a thorough understanding of what breaks the fast and what doesn't break the fast. I just want to let the parents know about that. Okay, also included in the presentation will be what breaks the fast, what doesn't break the fast, kafara for an individual who breaks his fast or doesn't fast, and also at the end, inshallah, program, we can expect the program to go for about an hour and 10 minutes. If need be, Salat al-Isha we don't expect, but we do have a guest and we must honor the guest. So if need be, we will maybe delay Salat al-Isha for 10 minutes maximum. I don't expect that we have to do that, I don't anticipate that we have to do that, but this is just in case. And also we will have a question and answer session after the presentation. So if you do have any questions that come up in your mind and you would like to ask, do know that you will have an opportunity to ask these questions. And today, mashallah, is a very special day because we were blessed with MAULAN Bilal to come in Jumu'ah. He gave us a Jumu'ah khutbah, and now he came again, mashallah, and he's here to present the essentials of fasting. I just want to introduce him, just mention a few sentences for you to understand who is in front of us and also the blessing and that I had to study under him. That mashallah, MAULAN Bilal is the director of Darul Hikmah. He himself is a very, very learned scholar, mashallah. I've sat with many ulama, there are very few ulama that I sat with the caliber of MAULAN Bilal, mashallah. MAULAN Bilal, he also is a teacher of ulum al-hadith at Darul Qasim, and he had taught many years the alam course at MAULAN Abdullah Salih Madrasa. And while he was teaching at MAULAN Abdullah Salih Madrasa, I myself had the blessed opportunity to study multiple sciences under him. So MAULAN Bilal most respected ustad that I have a great amount of love for. He himself has taught me Arabic grammar, Arabic morphology. He taught me Arabic rhetoric. He taught me inheritance, the laws of inheritance. He taught me the usul al-hadith, the principles of hadith. He taught me fiqh. So you can see that this is like the core of the alim course. MashaAllah, I had the great opportunity to study under such a great scholar. So without taking further time from the presentation, I would like to just directly go into the presentation. Without further ado, I would like to request MAULAN Bilal to present to us the essentials of fasting.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء وأشرف المرسلين وبعد. As our dear respected Imam Arif mentioned, the crux of the discussion today will be the legal rulings of the fast. There are so many rulings that pertain to the month of Ramadan, including how to determine the beginning and the end of Ramadan, the rules regarding fasting, the rules regarding i'tikaf, the rules regarding tarawih, etc., etc., that it would be impossible to thoroughly cover all of those issues in this short amount of time. In lieu of the brevity of time that is available for today's session, I've chosen to speak specifically on the rules of the siyam or the fast itself. Number one, who is necessitated or who is obligated to perform the fast and who is excused. Number two, what breaks the fast. And number three, what doesn't break the fast. These are the main issues that will be discussed in some detail. At the end of the session, inshallah ta'ala, we will have some time for questions and answers. Whatever I know, inshallah ta'ala, I will try to provide an answer for. And what I don't know, then I will refer, inshallah ta'ala, to the many scholars that are available in the city who we can refer to for the more detailed and intricate issues of deen. The first question, of course, when it comes to the idea of fasting is, what is fasting? The linguistic definition of the fast, as I discussed in the khutbah for those who were in attendance, the linguistic meaning of the word sawm or siyam. So you have these two words, sawm and siyam, which essentially are synonyms in the Arabic language, and they both linguistically mean at-tarku wal-imsak, to abstain or to restrain oneself from doing something. In that linguistic definition is the very spirit of the entire month of Ramadan and the entire act of fasting. That the spirit of fasting is to learn to abstain. As the scholars, the great scholars say, that if you were to compare the value of leaving sin as compared to doing good, the comparative value of doing good is less than avoiding evil. So abstinence, abstaining from what is evil, what is haram, the nawahi, the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited, is not only very virtuous, but also very important in the deen. So as a spiritual exercise, the sawm, the siyam, is the idea that in this period of time, these 29 or 30 days, this month of fasting, this is a month of abstinence. It's like an abstinence program. But the excellence of this month is that it's not like you have to be an addict to enter this program. You know, when you go to alcohol, you guys, inshallah ta'ala, don't go to Alcoholics Anonymous, right? Right? People will like shy away from those programs because they don't want to be seen attending a program that's teaching them abstinence. If a person is like addicted to smoking, addicted to whatever addiction they may be afflicted by, it's embarrassing. And so people don't want to deal with these addictions, they don't want to deal with these afflictions, and so they don't indulge in any exercise to resolve it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forces us to do this. But it's a voluntary act, but it's an obligatory act in the deen. But every single one of us, no matter the taqwa that we have, has to indulge in the fast of the month of Ramadan. So the idea, the spiritual element of the month of Ramadan and fasting is to learn abstinence. The idea isn't just to suffer through hunger and thirst, and the idea is not to control just your anger and not backbite. The overall idea of the month of Ramadan is to become more conscious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all times, because you've learned to abstain from things that feed the nafs. the nafs overpowers the self. And when you don't train yourself to overcome and dominate your nafs, then when it comes time to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you don't remember Allah. So the idea, that's the spiritual idea of Sawm. Legally speaking, right, the fiqhi definition, the istilahi definition, the legal terminological definition of siyam or Sawm is to refrain from anything entering the body cavity, or that which leads to the body cavity, meaning the jawf al-mu'tabar, they call this in Arabic the jawf al-mu'tabar, which is the stomach, and from sexual activity. So this covers essentially all the three major things that one has to abstain from in the month of Ramadan and fasting: eating, drinking. This includes also smoking because the entrance of any substance into the body cavity, and also from marital relations or sexual activity. So these are the things that one must restrain themselves from and abstain from. At what time do they have to abstain from them? From dawn to sunset. Right? Just from dawn to sunset. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the fast easy for us. In the beginning, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, if they didn't break their fast after Maghrib and they fell asleep, they had to continue that fast until the next day. It was really difficult in the very beginning of the legislation of Sawm, that some of the companions, if they fell asleep because they were so tired, they slept through Maghrib, right? Then they actually, when they woke up, they had to continue their fast. For us, alhamdulillah, and then eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala facilitated the rulings for the ummah and only necessitated abstaining from these things from dawn to sunset, from the peak, the first light of the morning, which was called al-fajr al-sadiq, the true dawn, all the way up to the sunset. And we'll talk a little more about that inshallah ta'ala as we go along. With intention, by the way, these definitions of legal texts are very comprehensive. So sometimes when you cover the definitions in books of Islamic law, you may cover them over the period of days or not weeks. Because within the definition you can compress a lot of rulings. So one of the conditions of the validity of fasting is that it must be accompanied with an explicit intention, a purposeful intention. Meaning it's not like you just woke up and you didn't happen to eat anything and you just were totally absorbed in your work, and by the time that you actually remember that you had to eat, it was Maghrib time and then you ate. You don't get any reward for that. It doesn't fulfill the obligation of fasting. It must be accompanied with an intention. And for whom it is permitted. Meaning there are certain people that are not allowed to fast, and there are certain people that are excused from fasting. So the Sawm is obligatory upon certain individuals. We will now expand upon this definition, and this will be the entire presentation for today, inshallah. So this is the legal definition of Sawm. The first question that comes to mind is, upon whom is the fast obligatory? Upon whom is Siyam obligatory? I guess we could answer this question best if we talk about who is excused. Meaning that if we eliminate who is excused, everyone else falls into the category of those upon whom fast is obligatory. The first category of those people who are excused from the fast are the musafir. The musafirun are the people who are traveling. What this means in the school of Imam Abu Hanifa rahmatullah alayhi, and that's actually the focus of the discussion today because the majority of the audience follows the school. In the school of Imam Abu Hanifa, if a person travels before dawn, before the beginning of the fast, meaning they've started their journey, they've left the boundaries of their city. In the case of Bolingbroke will be considered a city. If you head out towards the airport, meaning you've left Bolingbroke and now you're near Chicago, you've technically, inshallah, by one definition, left your city. You are now technically a traveler if you're going to travel beyond Chicago 60 miles. So if a person left the city before dawn, they are considered a musafir, a traveler, and they are excused from fasting. If you began your journey after dawn, after you began fasting, or you intended to travel in the middle of the day, and you thought, well, I'm traveling today, so therefore I won't fast. In the school of Abu Hanifa, this isn't permitted. Because you did not begin the day as a musafir. The dispensation is for the person that begins the day as a musafir. The following day, if you're still traveling, then it is allowed for that person to excuse themselves from fasting. Now, this doesn't mean that you cannot fast if you are a traveler. As silly as that may seem to some people believe that you cannot, mistakenly believe that you cannot fast if you are traveling. And in this day of ease and facility in traveling, if a person finds himself capable of fasting without difficulty while he's traveling, that is best. And there is more virtue in that, inshallah ta'ala. But if the person doesn't, for whatever reason, decide to fast, and you are in a group of people, and there are certain people who want to fast, there are certain people that don't want to fast. You are not to judge the ones that are not fasting because, oh, why aren't you being man enough? Why aren't you being strong enough, courageous enough, brave enough to go through the difficulty that fasting while traveling entails? So a traveler is completely excused from fasting, but they do have to make it up eventually after the month of Ramadan. A woman experiencing menstruation, which is hayd or lokia, or which is nifas, postnatal bleeding, the bleeding that takes place after giving birth. A woman that is experiencing these types of bleeding will not fast. She is not allowed to fast. So the subtle difference between these two categories is that the traveler is allowed to fast. The woman experiencing menstruation is not allowed to fast. Similarly, a woman in nifas or postnatal bleeding will not fast. They will make up those fasts, however. They will not make up the salah that is missed during those days, but they will make up the missed fasts. Number 3, children. And in Islamic law, a child is defined as any child, boy or girl, that's prepubescent. They have not reached puberty. Meaning if a girl reaches puberty at the age of 9, she is now an adult by Islamic law legal definition. Meaning that they have to now fast. If a young boy, 11, abnormally let's say becomes pubescent, they reach puberty, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, they are now considered an adult. And they're mukallaf, they're legally responsible. They will be required to fast. Before that, they are not required to, although they are encouraged to. And many of the Sahaba and Tabi'een used to encourage young children to begin fasting as soon as they were capable of doing so. So in the issue of praying, they used to encourage praying at the age of 7. And when the child reaches any age that they consider their child capable of lasting the day without food, that's when they would begin to encourage their children to fast, although it doesn't become obligatory until they are an adult or pubescent. Number 4, physically unable individuals, including the elderly and the chronically ill. Terminally ill, right? A patient that's a cancer patient, for example. And especially with the elderly, you have to be careful. Some muttaqi individuals, pious, God-fearing individuals, they don't care much about their health in their old age. Right? And I've seen this actually with my own eyes, with mashayikh, with great shuyukh, that when they are afflicted by some sort of illness, they will refuse to take the dispensation, they want to fast. The doctor, the children, the relatives are recommending them not to fast. In fact, sometimes they are saying that if they do fast, they may even pass away. If that is the case, you have to be very wise about how you go about enforcing this dispensation, this rukhsa. In other words, I remember once we went to meet Shaykh al-Hadith, Maulana Safaraz Khan Safdar, rahimahullah ta'ala. He was a brilliant man. He was a hafiz of hadith. He used to be able to quote hadith from any book, and he would quote the page, the line, and even sometimes the word number. Like it's about the middle of the line on the 5th page, or the 5th line of the 125th page of Sahih Bukhari, volume 2. That's what memory he had, and he was afflicted with Alzheimer's. And eventually, as he became more and more weak, the doctors began to recommend that he not fast. So we went to visit him to get ijazah al-hadith in the month of Ramadan. And his children, who were themselves very old themselves, they recommended to us that when you are here, be very careful about how you go about refusing drink, because he's going to offer you food. That's the way of the mashayikh, mashallah. That they don't let a guest come without taking something, meaning food. So it was very interesting how we had to somehow not lie, but say that no, it's okay, we don't need anything. And at that particular time, his khadim, the servant, came with a bowl of soup. for him to eat. And he refused to eat until we ate. So I remember that somehow the hosts themselves were able to convince him that no, you eat first, then they'll eat later on, separately, meaning after Maghrib, inshallah. So, but you have to be very careful because sometimes when one is ill themselves, they aren't capable of determining what's best for their own health. Therefore, you should consult with a reliable doctor who's a religious person who's aware of the limitations of the person and also the rulings of Islam. And if they are determined to be physically unable to, we encourage them not to fast. Also, if the sickness if fear of illness increasing or recovery slowing, meaning that this person has the capability to fast, they have the physical capability to fast, but if they do and they're sick, the sickness will increase or the recovery will slow down. Right? A person has had surgery, and the doctor says that after surgery you need to eat a lot in order to replenish the blood loss or whatever you may have lost in the process. And you could fast if you wanted to, but it will really slow down the recovery, and it may give you some problems in the future. If that's the case as well, you are not obligated to fast and you're excused. And then lastly, a pregnant or breastfeeding woman if there is a fear of harm. This is a very common question that I'm asked by women who are in either of these two cases. In either of these two cases, it's actually, number one, up to the woman to decide whether she feels capable of fasting, and number two, she should consult with a reliable OB-GYN or a doctor that is aware of her condition, her physical state, and can recommend, based upon experience and perhaps previous pregnancies, whether or not she should be fasting, given what stage of the pregnancy she's in. So there's no hard and fast rule for this. There are many women that will be fasting throughout the month of Ramadan and they'll give birth on the day of Eid. The most difficult of times. And there are some women that even in the easiest times of the pregnancy, they find it very difficult and the doctor will say you shouldn't be fasting. So it really depends upon the individual case. Again, consultation with a doctor is recommended, as well as with individuals in the family who will be aware of the physical nature of that person, because every woman is different. What is considered to be fear, what is considered to be harm? Reasonable harm. In both cases of pregnancy and breastfeeding, reasonable fear of harm to the mother or to the baby is indicated by a number of things. Number one, manifest signs. She's fasting and she becomes so weak that she's incapable of passing the day. Right? Number two, relevant past experience. She's tried it before in a previous year when she was, say, pregnant or breastfeeding, and she wasn't able to do it without affecting the flow of milk, or physically actually damaging herself or harming herself or the baby. Then, of course, that also is a clear reason to say that there's going to be harm. And number three, the notification of an upright Muslim expert. Most often now, a physician. If you have midwives or other women in the community who are experts, although they may not be certified physicians, their opinion can also be taken. Okay. In more detail, upon whom normally is the fast obligatory? Number one, of course, the fast is obligatory upon Muslims. So Islam is an obligation, or is a condition for the obligation. Number two, puberty. Number three, sanity. And number four, knowledge that fasting is obligatory. In lands in which the community is not a majority Muslim, it cannot be assumed that a new Muslim automatically knows about the rulings of the fast. Sometimes when someone accepts Islam right before the month of Ramadan, you don't advise them to fast right away. You give them a little at a time. So if they are not told about the fast in any month of Ramadan that they were Muslim, but they didn't know about the obligation of the fast, the following year, let's say when they find out, they may ask, do I have to make up those fasts? The ruling is that you do not, because they were not aware, and this is not the Islam, and therefore they were not obligated at that time because they did not have the knowledge. Does that make sense? So until they are made knowledgeable of the obligation of the fast, then and only then will they be obligated to. But that is in the case that we are in here as a minority in this country, not in, say, India, Pakistan. And the reason I said India Islam is so commonly accessible, or the rulings of Islam are so commonly known, that even those who accept Islam, Hindus who accept Islam, have easy access. It's very unlikely that they will not know of this basic tenet of faith, or this basic pillar of faith, unless, of course, even in those cases, the scholars have advised not to tell them of the fast of the month of Ramadan, in which case they will also be exempt. There's an interesting scenario that came about over almost 100 years ago, in the time of Hakim al-Ummah, MAULAN BILAL Ali. And this is also an important issue of da'wah. So, one of his students came to him with a case where there was a Hindu that had accepted Islam. And he had accepted Islam shortly before the month of Ramadan, and he told the Shaykh that I am in a dilemma because the man ran away. Why did he run away? He said, well, what happened was that when he came to Islam, I told him about the basics of Islam, the 5 pillars of Islam. And one of them, of course, was the fast, and in a few days Ramadan was going to begin. And he said, oh my God, I just left a religion in which you couldn't eat meat. I thought I'd become Muslim, at least be able to eat something more. And now you're telling me for 30 days I can't eat anything during the day. This is even harder than what I left behind. And he was so embarrassed because he felt that he couldn't fast, that he was going to go into more difficulty. So he just stopped coming to that person. Meaning that out of shame and embarrassment, he left, and he wasn't sure whether this person had left Islam or whether or not he decided not to become Muslim or what had happened. And Hakim al-Ummah MAULAN became so upset, that he said that had I been in your shoes, right? Paraphrasing. Had I been in your situation, I would not have told him about the fast for years until I knew he was ready for it. I would not have told him, this is an exaggeration, I mean, of course a person would become prepared in a shorter time than that, but if for years he wasn't ready, I wouldn't have told him about the fast for years until I knew that he was ready for it. So that's one of the interesting rules of da'wah. You don't give all at once. The conditions for the validity of the fast. Okay, so a person, he can fast. It's obligatory upon him. Now, what is, in addition to these conditions for the validity, the sihha of the fast? Number 1, intention. And we'll talk a little more about the intention, inshallah ta'ala, soon. He must have an explicit intention to be performing a fast, right, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as I mentioned, it can't be something incidental, that they just happen not to be eating or drinking during that time, and then at the very end of the day they eat, and they consider their fast to be complete. Number 2, they must be free from menstruation or lochia. And number 3, refraining from eating, drinking, and sexual activity. If any of these things are missing throughout the fast, then the fast will not remain valid. In other words, if in the middle of the day the woman's hayd begins, her days begin, right? Or she gives birth, and she was like some women, mashallah, they have incredible strength that are written down in the annals of history, right? My teacher, Muhammad Jamil, mentioned about a woman in his village, that she, throughout her period of expectation, she was working in the fields. And one day when she was working in the fields, she felt like the baby was coming, and she tried to walk home, but she couldn't, and she sat on the side of the road, gave birth by herself, cut the cord somehow, right, and then walked home with the baby. So he said sometimes you have these extraordinary cases, but that's not the norm, of course, right? So let's say that there was a case where a woman was fasting, and she gives birth that same day, then that fast would not be complete. It would be incomplete, and it would have to be, it wouldn't have to be made up in this case, because her lochia would have begun that same day. But if a woman experiences her hayd bleeding during the day when she had begun the day fasting, then that day technically will not count. That will not be a day of her fast, and she will not be able to complete the fast, but she will abstain from eating and drinking as a symbolic gesture. Intention. Some specifics about intention. One of the most common misconceptions about intention is that it has to be verbalized. The intention does not have to be verbalized. In other words, it doesn't have to be said out loud, although it is better to do so out loud. It also doesn't have to be said in the Arabic language, right? You don't have to say, Nawaitu Sawm Ramadan, Nawaitu Ghad, right? Sawm Ramadan. You don't have to say anything in the Arabic language, although this is a preferred act because some scholars say it is a reminder to others and oneself, right, to mentally prepare oneself, to be mentally conscious of the fast. Sometimes when we say before we perform the salah, that I am performing the salah for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, 4 rak'ahs of salat Isha. You don't have to say all that. If you know what you're doing, if you know I'm performing 4 rak'ahs of salat Isha, and I'm doing it for the sake of Allah, that conscious state is enough for an intention. But by verbalizing it, it reminds a person, because sometimes it becomes so ritualized, right? It becomes such like a rasam, a ritual, that we don't necessarily feel conscious or we're not aware of what we're doing. So it's better to verbalize the intention, but it's not necessary. If a person didn't recite the dua beginning the fast at the time of suhoor, it doesn't mean that their fast was not valid. Number 2, in the month of Ramadan, it is best to perform the niyyah before going to sleep. The night of the previous night. Meaning before you wake up for the suhoor, it is best to go to sleep with an intention. But let's say a person didn't make an explicit intention and they went to sleep and they also didn't eat or drink anything, right? After Fajr or after dawn, technically they have up to midday. They have up to midday to make an intention, before which then the siyam or the fast will be valid. But if midday passes and they did not make an intention, even in their heart, of performing the fard fast of Ramadan, then the Ramadan fast will not count, even if they didn't eat or drink anything. What is midday? Midday is not noon, and midday is also not zawal time or the time of dhuhr. Midday is calculated based on the beginning of dawn up to Salat al-Maghrib, or sunset. So let's say what dawn these days is 2:30, right? A solid is 2:30. The true dawn is 2:30 these days. Correct, or is that Seattle, Minnesota times? I've been traveling a lot last weekend. 3:30. So hold on, I just came from, by the way, Minnesota and Seattle. You know what time they're praying Isha? 11:30 is when it comes in. And you know what time Fajr comes in? 2:30. And I asked them, aren't you guys going to get some sort of dispensation for your condition over here? They said, no, dispensation is for the Canadians. We're still in the, where dispensation is not given. Meaning that we're going to tough it out, of course. And they were kind of like laughing at us. Like you Chicagoans, you think you live north, you think that things are tough for you. In Seattle, subhanAllah, I don't even remember getting more than 2 hours of sleep at night. At nighttime, because Fajr was like 2:30, right? So 3 o'clock, so you go to sleep at say 1 o'clock and you wake up around 3 o'clock in Fajr. But in any case, so let's say 2:30 is Subh al-Sadiq, the true dawn, and then Maghrib is 8:30, or 3:30 I said, right? 3:30. So that would be what, how many hours in between? That would be a total of 18 hours?
18 hours.
18 hours. So then that would mean that 9 hours past dawn, for those who haven't done the math yet, right? 18 divided by 2 is 9. So then 9 hours past dawn would be midday, which would be what time? If 3:30 is the dawn, then it'd be 12:30, correct? Which is actually before Zawal time. It's before Zawal time. Zawal time these days I think is like 12:50 something. So that's the time that, up to that time, you can make an intention to perform your siyam. After that, then there is no opportunity to perform or to make an intention. All right, so that's the answer to the question: what is midday? Some recommended acts for a person that is fasting. The first recommended act is to eat the suhoor, or what we call sahri, okay, the sahri meal. Although it is sometimes difficult to eat the suhoor if you live in certain areas where there's no time between Isha and Fajr. Meaning that some people prefer to eat, then go to sleep, get some rest, wake up for Fajr. If that's the case and that's the exception because of where you live, then that's fine. But if you can possibly pray or eat the suhoor before praying Fajr, that is best. And there's a lot of hadith that speak about the virtue of eating the suhoor. Number two, to delay the suhoor to shortly before Fajr, meaning that not to eat it before going to sleep, for example, after Salat al-Tarawih. And then lastly, to hasten to break the fast when Maghrib enters. Regarding this one point, you want to offer your iftar as soon as possible, but not also before iftar's time begins. Some people wait several minutes. They wait 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes extra just to be careful. And then this causes like fighting in the house. There's somebody that's really irritated because it's a really long fast. They want to eat, and the samosas in front of them, and they don't want anything getting in the way of their food. But let's say the mother of the house is saying, no, you have to wait because it's 1 more minute. We said, no, but on the timetable it says it's time. No, we're going to wait 2 more minutes. That is fine. That is ihtiyat. That is not against the hadith which encourages to eat quickly. You have to realize that, of course, they didn't calculate by the seconds in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They were calculated based upon what they could see. Therefore, right, sometimes some people, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam wanted to explain to people that there's no extra virtue until until it becomes extra dark. You don't get more reward for that. The idea is that when Allah has made something easy for you, to inflict hardship upon yourself unnecessarily is not permitted. There's no virtue in that. But if you are just trying to ensure that your fast is valid by waiting several minutes,